There we go. So welcome everybody over on the Facebook feed and to the uh, evening program of October 12th of the Los Angeles Audubon Society. I'm Travis Longcore. I'm the host of the meeting tonight and president of LA Audubon. I had just a few quick announcements before we get started. One is that if you're interested in getting out and seeing people in person, you can always go to our website, laaudubon.org, and hit the events tab. We've got a series of bird walks gearing back up now as migration gets underway, and also cross-listed from other groups. The Bruin Birding Club at UCLA has a bird walk on Friday morning. We have a bird walk at Kenneth Hahn State Recreation Area on Saturday morning, as well as a bilingual walk at the South LA Wetlands Park on Saturday. And on Sunday, there is a beginner's bird walk at Will Rogers Historic Park, and that one's limited. And so if you want a spot there, you'll need to text the organizers because they keep it small so that people can sort of get their first orientation and views of some nice birds. Of course, if you're experienced, you're welcome as well, because then you can help share the joy with some new folks. But do sign up for that one. The others are just come as you are, and often we'll have some binos to borrow as well. Brenda has her hand raised. Brenda, do you have a question? You can go ahead and unmute if you had a question. All right, so waiting on that. If she does, we'll get started. It was a mistake. Okay, no worries. But do feel free to ask questions here. The other thing I want to let everybody know is that if you filled out the form that you don't know you're a member of LA Audubon, but you'd like to be, you can go to our website as well. There is a Join Renew button in the upper right, and a individual membership for a year is just $25. It helps us be able to offer basically all of our programs to the public without a charge. So the bird walks, and it helps us pay the insurance to be able to offer those things, and our evening programs and our conservation work that we do, the newsletter that we put out. All that is supported by our members. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker for this evening, is Ryan Terrill, Dr. Terrill, who has his undergrad from the University of California, Santa Cruz. So go Yellow Slugs, something along those lines. And a Ph.D. from Louisiana State, rather incredible biology and birding history there. Has been a postdoctoral researcher at the Moore Lab of Zoology at Occidental College, and so he's been down here in Los Angeles, was down here for 2020 to 2022, and has now just started in his first, I don't know if you're on quarters or semesters, but just started at Cal State Stanislaus as an assistant professor. And so I'm really delighted to welcome Ryan to present about Bear Divide, one of our, local migratory watching spots that he's really pioneered the work at. And I'm excited for you to share this, and I guess we'll take questions at the end, probably easiest with the number of folks that we have here. So go ahead and welcome everybody. Big round of applause virtually from around the room here, and look forward to your talk.
Thanks so much, Travis. Yeah, and if you have questions, you can save them to the end, but also if it whatever Travis wants, but maybe you can also stick them in the chat, so you don't forget, or just so we can read them at the end or whatever.
Good idea.
Whatever works. I will pull up. Okay. Excellent. So I really appreciate that introduction. So I think everybody may be more or less familiar with Bear Divide, but I'll just give a little talk about what's going on in Bear Divide, how we found it, what we've been doing there, what we've been learning about Bear Divide lately. So I'm going to start with a little video about what Bear Divide is. This might be a little choppy, it might be a little hard to see, But what hopefully you'll see here is some birds flying by. So this is early in the morning in the spring at Bear Divide. Right there. Oof. You see how much is moving through right now? We'll just call these pastors because I'm taking a video. 80. Wilson's just like tried to murder. What a fraud. Another violet green. Wilson's. So this was from one of the first days I was up there with Chris Dean, who some of you may know. When we had heard there might be some birds up there, might be some stuff going on, and we just saw this flood of birds going through. So I know it was really hard to see, but hopefully you saw some of the specks going by, and those were birds. And what's pretty cool about it is, these are birds migrating during the day, when most of these species migrate during the night, and they're migrating really low down to the ground when most of these species migrate high up. So a lot of these birds spend most of their migration way up in the atmosphere and at night. And Bear Divide, as much as anything else, is just a spot where we can watch birds migrate, which is pretty cool. So it's this low pass here that birds seem to stream through. And what's cool is hopefully some of you notice that stuff's often really low down. It's like going between your knees and right by your waist and stuff, which is pretty awesome. So Bear Divide is this pass in the San Gabriel Mountains where during the spring we can watch huge numbers of birds migrating. It was first found by a couple people. Dan Maxwell, who's a local birder, was doing consulting work up there and having a meeting in the parking lot in the morning. And they were just standing there, having their meeting, and there were birds like zipping by him. And he's like, "What the heck's going on?" And he told me about it. This was when I was still in Louisiana. But when I was moving to LA, he told me about, this is the spot that, this one morning in the spring, I saw this stuff going by. And I thought it was really cool. And also John Garrett, who's a local birder, who's now in Ithaca, New York, working for eBird, he had also spent some time up in that area while doing other bird surveys and had seen similar stuff. So birds migrating through that area low down in the morning. So when I moved to LA, I wanted to follow up on this. I was interested in seeing what the deal was. Heard these rumors. Dan had maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of birds. John had maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of birds. And there are places like this around the world, and I'll get into this in a little bit, where you can see what's called dawn flight of birds migrating at dawn. But we really don't have a lot of places on the Pacific Flyway. Butterbrett's one, and so I was really excited that there might be a new place where we can see dawn flight. And so this is part of why we were so excited in this video, is like it appeared that there was consistent movement. And it's a pretty spectacular place. We've already had a single day with almost 14,000 individual birds that we estimated. There's so many birds, it was hard to count, but we did our best. We tried to count everything for a period and then ID and then go count everything for a period and kind of extrapolate. But there were at least 14,000 birds that day. And, a good day in April, May, 5,000-6,000 birds is pretty regular. I imagine maybe at this point, maybe quite a few of you have been to Bear Divide at this point. But as far as, migration sites on the West Coast, especially on the immediate coast, there's anything like this. There are a couple other kind of small dawn flight spots in San Diego and Santa Barbara and stuff that get quite a few birds, but Bear Divide gets way, way, way more. The only similar place in, sort of the western part of the U.S. seems to be Butterbrett Springs. So yeah, 14,000 birds, if you can imagine. If you haven't been there, or if you haven't been there for a day like that, try to imagine staying in that little pass with 14,000 birds going by you. It's pretty amazing. And quite a few species, that day we had 77 species. Pretty amazing. We've started to get, attention from outside. So here's Birdcast out of Cornell. They hopefully people have seen Birdcast, but they do some pretty cool stuff now with basically pulling bird migration data out of weather radar data, and they can detect how many birds are moving every night and also forecast, and they're interested in some of this dawn flight stuff. And this big push that we got those 14,000 birds. They did an article on Birdcast, and now I've been working a little more closely with Andy Farnsworth, who's on there, and some of the other people at Birdcast, with trying to coordinate some of what we're doing, some of what they're doing with detecting birds on radars and seeing them in the morning. So if we look at the major migratory bird flyways, land bird flyways on Earth, in the U.S. we've got these three: the Eastern, Central, and Pacific, and there are a bunch in the Old World. There are quite a few, maybe not a whole lot, but there are a few of these dawn flight spots. There's a couple in the East. Cape May is a really famous dawn flight spot in the spring and fall. Lake Pontchartrain, Louisiana, Tadoussac Dunes or Tadoussac Dunes, not sure how to say it, in Quebec. And there's a couple places in Europe. But again, here on the Pacific Flyway, we didn't really have any places like that, again, besides maybe Butterbread Springs, before we knew about Bear Divide. And so morning flight, we still don't have a really good idea of why birds engage in morning flight. This paper by Wiedner et al. With Richard Crossley, who lives in the area now, they hypothesized that birds, at least in Cape May, were overshooting the point, ending up out over water, and then when it got light out, they were turning around and going back to land, which very well may be the case there. There's some evidence that sometimes that may not be the case. Obviously, that's not what's going on at Bear Divide, because there's no water, but we think they might be, as it gets light out, flying lower down to look for food, or as it gets light out and they go down to land for the day to forage for food, they may realize that there's not quite enough food and keep going. But we still don't really have a good handle on why birds are engaging in morning flight, especially at Bear Divide, and that's one of the frontiers that we're trying to get into with our research long term. So I was talking a little bit about Butterbread Springs. I think most of you are familiar with this. This is really the only other kind of dawn flight spot in the spring portion of North America that we know about. And what we think is going on at Butterbread Springs is, you see it's in this big north-south canyon. Birds are probably flying over the desert and kind of getting funneled up the canyon, so there's no habitat, no food, anything. They're getting funneled up this canyon, and then they see this spring with trees and they put down into it. And so that's always kind of been our guess is what's been going on at Butterbread. But again, why they're flying during the day, why they're flying low down, we're still trying to figure out. The cool thing about Bear Divide is, as opposed to Butterbread Springs, which is out in the middle of the desert, Bear Divide is, 15 minutes outside of the world's largest metropolitan area, or one of the world's largest metropolitan areas. And cool for me is when I was at Oxy, it was only 25-30 minute drive for me, and so I was able to, part of the reason I started going up there was because I could just do it before work. I could just get up really early and go hang out at Bear Divide for an hour or two and still make it back to work on time, which is pretty dang cool. So a lot of these morning flight spots are fairly remote. Cape May is not that far from Philadelphia or something, but Bear Divide is essentially in LA. It's just right outside of LA. It's a really quick drive outside of LA. Pretty dang cool and pretty dang unique. This is from an article we published on Bear Divide in West here, just kind of showing what the area looks like and hypothesizing about how birds may be flying and pushed into the canyon. So if you look on the right side, I've put kind of some fog in the figure, that kind of grayish stuff, and that's right at 820 meters. And what you can see there is Bear Divide has this kind of similar north-south canyon-ish that's wide, that gets wide. That's Cagle Canyon and Little Tahunga Canyon, and then gets narrower and narrower as it goes up. And so as birds are flying, if they're flying kind of low, they're going to get pushed up into this canyon. It gets narrower and narrower and eventually funneled into Bear Divide. So those red arrows there are kind of hypothetical flight paths. You can imagine if you're a bird, you've dropped down out of the atmosphere, it's daytime, you're flying low, and you see the San Gabriels. From LA, you look at the San Gabriels, it looks like this big wall, right? You don't necessarily want to way up back over it. So as birds are trying to fly north, they may be hitting the San Gabriels, getting pushed northwest, and then Bear Divide is basically, those canyons are the first low pass they encounter as they're trying to go around the San Gabriels. And so we don't know for sure that that's what's going on, but from looking at the topography, that's kind of our guess as to why birds are getting funneled through this narrow gap, Bear Divide. I just wanted to go through, one of the common questions that I get at Bear Divide is like, where are these birds coming from? Where are these birds going to? And the answer is all sorts of different places. We have some birds that are coming from as far south as Central and Southern South America. So Swainson's thrushes, they winter in all the way north into Mexico, but all the way south into Argentina. And if you look at the abundance, those light yellow colors in Mexico, Swainson's thrush is actually a fairly uncommon winterer in North and Central America. Whereas if you look at those kind of darker red and purpley colors in the Andes, they can be downright abundant in the Andes in the winter. And all I'm trying to say here is the vast majority of the population of Swainson's thrushes winters in the Andes. Some of these birds we're getting, so this is them in the winter, they're down in the Andes, they start to fly north, they go up into North America, and then they breed. We have Swainson's thrushes that breed on the coast in California and to the north of us. So they're coming from really far south. Some of them are breeding locally, some of them may be breeding Oregon, Canada, all the way up into Alaska. So there's their spring migration up through Bear Divide, breeding, and then back down, all the way down into South America, to the Andes. And then we have a lot of species, and there's quite a few birds like this. Olive-sided flycatcher is one, western wood pewee is one, stuff that goes way down to Central South America. And then we have a lot of species, probably the bulk of the species that come through Bear Divide tend to winter in Mexico and Central America. So, for example, Vox's swift. They are spending their winter mostly in Mexico. If you see, there's a couple distributions here that are sort of melded together. So the ones in the Yucatan here and in towards Tabasco and Veracruz are actually year-round residents, and you'll see that as we go through the map. So most of our birds are probably wintering in western Mexico. Can you see my mouse? I can see your face. Thank you. So mostly wintering in western Mexico and probably farther south in like the Guatemalan highlands and stuff. You can see here's the winter, and they're in Mexico. Here the spring, they go up through Southern California and up this way. And you can see, oh, I should have paused it. A couple things to notice. Right in March or so, I guess this is towards May, a lot of the population is going through the transverse mountains in California. So, and we see lots and lots of Vox's swifts at Bear Divide. We could be getting, a pretty good portion of, the global population of Vox's swifts coming through Bear Divide. I don't know, but you also see all these birds left behind. These are the resident populations of Vox's swifts that don't migrate. So yeah, lots of Vox's swifts coming and going at Bear Divide, and then there's their fall migration back down. Warbling vireo is another one that winters in Mexico, especially western Mexico, that we get tons of at Bear Divide. And they breed all over the U.S. So we have birds that, like Vox's swift, that winter in Mexico and Central America and are only in the West. Birds like warbling vireo that are distributed throughout the U.S. We have the western ones coming through. And then there's some other cool birds that are moving kind of around within the western U.S. And some birds that we don't necessarily think of as strictly migratory like some of these other things. So, for example, Lawrence's goldfinch is a bird that is fairly nomadic and tends to just move around, where resources are, and they kind of pop up here and there. But at Bear Divide, we see really regular movements of Lawrence's goldfinches with our other migrants. So lots of birds going north, clearly migrating. And you can see when you look at the range map, they sort of they move around. They don't have this really strong south in the winter or north in the summer migration like other stuff. But at least as far as we can see at Bear Divide, they tend to follow really similar patterns to other birds that are migrating. So there's something going on where they do seem to be moving north in the spring with other birds. And we get lots and lots of Lawrence's goldfinches moving through Bear Divide, depending on the year. Another cool one is Phainopepla. Phainopepla is a bird that was thought to be either kind of resident or nomadic, and then this work came out. Dan Baldessari, who's a professor at State University in New York in, I think, SUNY Oswego, he put GPS tags on these Phainopeplas that were breeding in oak woodlands in Los Angeles, in the coastal slope of Southern California. So not just LA, but I think also Ventura counties and Riverside. And he found that these birds, after breeding, they would fly out to the desert, sometimes as far away as, down here, this one went all the way to, an E, and that dark blue one went all the way down to Chihuahua, so they go out to Arizona, New Mexico, Sonora, all the way to Chihuahua and breed again, which is pretty cool. We didn't really. There had been some thought that this might happen or something like this might happen, but this was the real first kind of solid documentation. And lo and behold, we get lots of phainopeplas flying through Bear Divide, which is really cool because, you know, it's not like these other birds that are doing spring migration from their wintering site to their breeding site. They're going from one breeding site to another. And it's probably driven by monsoonal rains. And so in the middle of the summer, early summer, it's more moist on the coastal slope in California. And then it gets really dry in August to September. That's fire season. But that's the monsoon season in northwest Mexico and southern Arizona and New Mexico. And so they're probably doing something completely different. They're coming through Bear Divide to go out to the desert to breed in the monsoons, which is cool. And the monsoon season tends to start in kind of late June at the earliest, mostly through July and August. And these phainopeplas do come through a little later. Our peak of phainopeplas is kind of mid to late May and even into June. Another cool one that we get lots of is band-tailed pigeons. And I think we, you know, in Southern California often think of band-tailed pigeons as a resident. They're also, you know, they have this disjunct distribution all the way through, you know, kind of the spine of the Americas. So they're in the Sierra Madre Occidental, through Central America and into the Andes, all the way into Bolivia, which is pretty cool. Even though there's some recent work showing the South American ones are likely a different species, and they'll probably be split out. But anyway, that's besides the point. We think of them as resident here, but what's really interesting is I want you to watch as I show you this map, Oregon and Washington and British Columbia. You can see this is the middle of winter, and there's no band-tailed pigeons in any of those, in Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. Maybe a tiny patch around Seattle. And in the spring, it fills up with them. So we think of them as residents in Southern California, but they get out of Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia in the winter, and they go somewhere. And you see how dense they are in Southern California in the middle of the winter. They may be coming here or somewhere near here. And we see lots and lots of band-tailed pigeons going north in spring migration. So this is something that really surprised me at Bear Divide, was that the band-tailed pigeons, I thought we'd just get a few going back and forth commuting locally, but we actually get pretty big numbers going north, and it's probably these birds going up into the Pacific Northwest to breed, which is pretty dang cool. Another thing I didn't really expect. Another surprise was Cassin's kingbirds, which is another bird that if you live in Southern California, you probably think of as a resident endemic to, you know, Trader Joe's parking lots. But that's actually a really small portion of the species range. You can see it's this little part on coastal Southern California, which are these resident parking lot birds that we know and love. Look at how many other ones there are in Mexico and in Baja. And this is in the middle of the winter again. Check out what happens with them. They go north into highland pinyon juniper habitat in the southwest, and that's where they breed. So we kind of have two really different populations. A resident one in coastal Southern California and a highly migratory one that breeds in pinyon juniper upland habitats in the southwest. But notice where a lot of them are wintering is Baja. So they're coming up through Baja somewhere and then crossing back over this way. Also notice some of them breed as close as, you know, northwest Arizona, close to Las Vegas even, so not far from California. And we actually get quite a few Cassin's kingbirds flying north through Bear Divide, which again really surprised me. You know, I thought, you know, we would either see none or there would be a local breeding pair, which sometimes there is. Early in the season, in like mid-March or so, they are quite common. They outnumber western kingbirds. We get quite a few. We get a lot of Cassin's kingbirds moving north in the spring, which really surprised me. And my guess is that it's probably these birds that were wintering in Baja that come up the peninsula, and then just like the phainopeplas, at some point they have to cut from the coast back inland, and they probably come through Bear Divide. We still don't know if that is the case. You can see also some of the birds, you know, they go from in the winter strictly in Southern California. Some of the ones in the northern edge of the range up here towards the Salinas Valley and parts of the Central Valley may be migratory or partially migratory. So it could be those birds or it could be a mix. We still don't know, but that's pretty cool too, to me at least. Maybe you all think it's lame. I think it's great. So that was a brief overview of what birds migrate at Bear Divide, where they come from, and some of the surprises. One of our big questions is when do birds migrate at Bear Divide? This is Birdcast, which I was talking about a little bit earlier, which is pretty dang cool. So they have basically, I'm sure a lot of you know this, but weather radar, the NextRad radar system that the U.S. has all over to detect weather, can also detect birds. Basically, it's just Doppler radar detecting objects in the atmosphere, which are usually ice or crystals or water droplets, also bounces off birds. And so this lab at Cornell has basically figured out how to extract bird data from the weather data and predict it into the future. And so you can see here on May 4th, 2021, they predicted a pretty high movement of birds in Southern California. And I just bring this up to tell you that it works pretty dang well. Usually when I check these maps and then go out to Bear Divide the next day, it's pretty good. You know, if it says it's going to be bad, it's usually pretty bad. If it says it's going to be good, it's usually pretty good. And so, you know, if you're interested in going up there or interested in looking at migration in general, Birdcast is a pretty sweet tool to look at. And again, we're working with them to use our observations from Bear Divide to sort of ground truth these predictions and these data, which is also hopefully going to be pretty fun. I also just today got off the phone with an engineer from the Jet Propulsion Lab at NASA who designs radio arrays to send up to the moon and Mars and stuff, and he thinks we can design a pretty cheap array to put up at Bear Divide that would track individual birds, be able to track and count birds as they're going up just like passively, which would be pretty sweet. There would be like, it would be like the only one on Earth. It's like one on Mars and a couple on the moon. Then we could maybe put one in Bear Divide. So that'd be pretty sweet. I got off fun with him today. I think he thinks we could do it, but we'll do some tinkering and see if it works. But it would be fun. Here's what I'm talking about with the weather radar. So you can see there's all these clouds here. This is weather, and then watch as night falls across the U.S. goes from east to west. It all lights up with all that fuzziness. That's migrating birds taking off. And so that's what the raw data look like. So basically they can take the weather out of that and look at birds. But this always fascinates me. I watch these, when I get up at like 4:30 in the morning to go to Bear Divide, I always take a look at this page to see what the weather radar looked like the night before. So again, all those fuzzy donuts that pop up, that's all birds. So the past couple of years, ever since we first identified Bear Divide as a really important part, as a really cool, unique, important place for migratory birds, we've been trying to get a handle on what's going on there, you know, what species are coming through and when. So the first couple of years, we were just up there birding and trying to e-bird. And then starting 2 years ago, we were able to hire a counter. So this tall, handsome fellow in the orange cap is Devin Camerix Burke. He was our first counter 2 years ago. And we got this tablet. We have this system where there's just big buttons for every species so that it's easy. You could be, all right, Nashville Warbler 6, Black-throated Warbler 4, and we could just enter data as quickly as possible as stuff's coming through so we can get real-time timestamps as birds are coming through. So basically what we did the first year, just stand there and just try to count all the birds as they were going by, which was pretty fun. It's a lot to try to keep up with sometimes. It helps to have helpers around. But that's what we've been doing. We set up a website, beardivide.org, where you can actually see the live data. So not only are we taking the data on this tablet, but we have it connected to the internet, and we're streaming the data live as it comes through. So any morning, there's a couple ways you can look at it, but this is a screen grab I took one morning when Devin was up there counting, and you can just, all these arrows are birds going by Bear Divide, and down the bottom, okay, 4 yellow rumps, 1 band-tailed pigeon, kestrel, 6 cliff swallows, violet green swallow. That's live as, you know, that is being broadcasted live as the birds are coming by, which is pretty fun, pretty cool to be able to check out. And, you know, on days when I can't go up to Bear Divide, at least I can bird vicariously through this. And there's other ways to look at the data. For example, we have this plot with species, with different species have different, you know, shapes and colors, and you can see how many have been going by at certain time and stuff. And again, you can just go check out beardivide.org, go to see live data, and you can explore the data in all these different ways. How many species for the day, how many individuals for the day. And then you can also get breakdowns of by species over here, like how many there were by day and stuff like that. So there's all sorts of cool ways to look at the data. It's also been a really productive place for engagement and local birders. Everybody loves Bear Divide, you know, from the most hardcore bird lister. And, you know, there's all sorts of stuff that you can see up there that's really hard to see in other parts of LA County. And we've had some really cool rarities. just about anybody who's interested in birds loves it because you can see all this stuff that's hard to see. I mean, like when you just got in bird, how many Nashville warblers do you usually see in a day? You know, if you got on a birding trip and you see 2 or 3 Nashville warblers, you're like, wow, cool, 2 or 3 Nashville warblers, like, it was a really good day. And then you can go to Bear Divide and you can have 150 of them fly by your knees in 30 minutes or something. So it's like, you know, it's pretty spectacular. And then on the other end, you know, it's great for students and kids and stuff because, you know, a lot of times you take people who've never birded before out. You know, you give binoculars, you're like, oh, there it is up in the top of the tree. And they try to learn, oh, it just went behind something. And they don't see anything. You know, even if you're not trying to identify the birds, know nothing about birds, you can just go stand there and, you know, watch all this stuff fly by. And it's awesome. It's mesmerizing. So it's been really great for engagement and outreach for people of all stripes. And we have been taking college courses up there. So this is some students from Occidental. We've had K through 12 up there. Graduate students from UCLA, all sorts of people, which is pretty fun. So Bear Divide's for everybody. And the nice thing is, you know, it's this like, it's a narrow gap for the birds to fly through, but as far as like fitting people, it's a pretty big spot with a big parking lot, and you just stand there. So it's like nobody's scaring the birds; they're flying through anyway. So like you can pack a bunch of people in there. You know, it's not like there's one bush and one bird and everybody's all trying to see it and it's impossible. So that's pretty nice. It accommodates a lot of people too, which is nice. Here's a cool picture I took of a Bullock's Oriole flying over the crowd of people one morning. Another thing I've been trying to do up there lately is work with flight calls. Migratory birds tend to give a different call when they're in flight or migrating than the call they give on the ground. And in the East, we have a pretty good idea of flight calls, pretty good knowledge of flight calls. Because a lot of work that's been done at Cape May, which is basically just sitting there in the morning, watching birds fly by, recording their call, and then knowing what it was. But we still lack some knowledge of Western birds, and we don't have big databases of flight calls of Western birds. And so that's something I've been trying to do the last couple of years. You can see all I did here was stick my microphone on my tripod, and as birds went by, I would just call the bird out to, you know, something fly by, but okay, that was a Wilson's warbler, and then I can go back and extract it. So on the left here, you can see a sonogram of some flight calls I took of a Wilson's warbler. And so that's another thing we're trying to get developing, especially because, you know, if we want to do long-term recordings, like the last year, we just left a recording unit out all spring to record all the calls of the birds that were going by. Kind of too much data to process by hand. And so there are artificial intelligence programs that can do that. But the thing is, they need a lot of training data. And so there's some that are pretty well trained on Eastern flight calls that can pretty automatically pick out Eastern flight calls, but none that work very well with Western flight calls. So we're also just trying to build up a big database so we can train computers to be able to do some of this flight call stuff for us to get, you know, really big data sets of flight calls. So that's been fun too, because there's very few places where you can hear a bird giving its migratory flight call and actually see the bird and know it was. And Bear Divide's one of them. The last couple of years, also a bird banding station has been set up. We're working together with them and collaborating with them. I'm not running the station or like technically involved in the station anyway, but I think it's awesome. It's a really great complement to what we're doing because we're doing this visual work and we're getting cool data on, you know, how many birds are going by and when and stuff. But by catching the birds, they can get a lot more data. They can get data about like fat deposition and weight, morphometrics and stuff like that. And again, with the public, you know, it's like they can go there and the birds can fly by. It can be really frustrating often to get a good look at a bird or identify a bird, but it's still really enjoyable to see the stuff zip by. And then you can just walk over to the banding station and they'll just like hold the bird up for you. Like, here it is. Here's, you know, the Western Tanager you just saw fly by. And especially for kids, you know, it's awesome. So it's really great they've been doing the bird banding. And we also just got funding with Pasadena Audubon to put a MODIS tower up, which is just a tower that receives signals from little tags you put on birds. And so hopefully in the next year or two, in conjunction with the banders, we'll start putting these tags on the birds and be able to track them using the MODIS network throughout California, which should be pretty cool. It uses the same sort of technology that like your phone uses to tell you where you are on the map. So in their first year, they captured over 1,000 birds of 40 species. This is my good friend Lauren Hill, who's one of the leaders of the banding station. And like I said, you know, birds will zip right by, but then you go to the banding station and get cool looks at like this Western Tanager. And 2 years ago, they caught this gray vireo, which is a ridiculously good bird. They used to breed in LA County. They may still breed sparsely. One bred a couple of years ago. But as a migrant, they're essentially unknown. You know, it's one of these birds there's a few birds that seem to teleport from their wintering range to their breeding range and are just about never seen on migration. So Connecticut warbler is one of these, Kirtland's warbler is one of these, and especially spring migration. And gray vireo is one of these too. I think this was only the third LA County record for spring migrant gray vireo, despite the fact that they, have bred in the county previously and may still breed in the county. So, and one of very, very few records of a spring migrant gray vireo in the state. So that was really cool and super exciting. Also,
we've got some timely questions right here if you want to take them.
Sure.
Just real quick. So generally, are the birds in good condition mass when they're captured? And do the gray vireos also migrate through Bear Divide southward in the fall?
They seem to be in good condition. They're not emaciated. They have some fat on them. But one of the things they're interested in the banding is looking at how much fat deposition they have compared to a bird migrating through. So maybe they are going down low because they're hungry and they need food. I think they're not super, super fatty, like, a bird that was just loading up for migration. But they tend to be in good condition. They're not like emaciated or anything. Gray vireos, as far as fall, I don't know about fall migrant records of gray vireos in LA. The one from San Clemente Island, I think. But birds in general in the fall in Bear Divide, it doesn't seem to be a big concentrating area for birds in the fall. I've been up there now, I think 4 times in the fall, and never really seen more migrants than you might see at any other place in the mountains. And I think it has to do with, going way back, the topology that kind of provides some more support for this idea with the funneling. Where was I? Here, with the funneling here, where birds are going north against the San Gabriels and get pushed into Bear Divide by this sort of north-south funnel canyon, and that seems to maybe not be in effect in the fall. And similarly, Butterbret Springs, which I showed you here, also really quiet in the fall. Tons and tons of birds in the spring, really quiet in the fall. And Bear Divide seems to be the same way, at least as far as I can tell. Could still be wrong. Thank you for those. One cool thing about bell sparrows, we've got, they've caught some bell sparrows up there. We've got 2 subspecies. We've got the bell-eye, which breeds in the coastal slope chaparral, which is what I expected that we would get at Bear Divide. They do breed near Bear Divide. But they've also, at the banding station, they've caught these bell sparrows that are the inland desert breeders, the Connessans, which are pretty cool. I don't think we really had a good idea that the Connessans moved through these parts of the mountains, which is kind of cool. And we wouldn't have known that if they hadn't caught them. So just to kind of go over a little bit of what we've learned so far, I think the most important thing that we've learned that we really didn't know is that the San Gabriel Mountains appear to be a really important corridor for landbird migration, Pacific flyway. I think, birds around the world, around California, wherever, think of LA County as a place where you can go see, really rare vagrants, especially in the winter, really cool stuff wintering. But I don't think LA County or the San Gabriel Mountains, were ever traditionally thought of as a big place of, high throughput of movements of migratory land birds, like, somewhere like Cape May or Butterbret Springs or Hawk Hill or something like that. And it seems to be a really important corridor. Again, some large numbers of some of the populations of these birds seem to be moving through this area, which is pretty cool and novel, not something we really knew. And some of these birds go through obviously at different times. So this is a plot I made. This is part of that paper that we published last year, just of timing of movement, timing and relative abundance of movement of 14 of the more common species. So at the very top is the peak passage is the earliest. At the very bottom, the peak passage is the latest. So yellow-rumped warbler is the earliest of the common ones, starts moving in March or so, peaks in mid-April, and then all the way down to yellow warbler, which is still moving all the way into June. And it's also relative abundance. You can see around mid-April, Wilson's warbler just completely takes over, and they're just absolutely everywhere. So another really interesting thing is, besides we have variation in when species come through, each species kind of has its own unique time of movement. and abundance. Some species are really abundant, like Wilson's warbler. Some species are less so, like chipping sparrow or Billix oriole. Keep in mind, these are the 14 most common species, so it's still like hundreds of each of those. But we also have variation in the width, right? Some stuff like yellow-rumped warbler or even yellow-throat warbler has a really spread out curve, migrates over a really long time. But some of them, like, for example, black-headed grosbeak, has a pretty compressed migratory period, right? They all kind of come through at once. And I'll get back to that. We have some guesses about that, but I'll get back to that. But sort of the thing to notice is every bird, every species seems to have its own migratory strategy as far as timing goes. I was talking about ground truthing those radar observations from Birdcast. So this is some of the collaboration we did with Birdcast, where we took their radar observations from nearby radar stations and pulled their data from bird movement and compared that to our data at Bear Divide. You can see on the right here, that's total migration traffic. On the bottom right, where's my mouse? I don't see my mouse. Anyway, on the bottom right, total migration traffic on the x-axis as detected by the radar, on the y-axis as detected by us. And you can see there's a lot of variation, but a pretty good correlation. And just to the left of that, on the bottom left, is, again, on the y-axis, birds detected by us. On the x-axis, birds detected by the radar, but then split up into hours over the night. And you can see it works better kind of earlier in the night, so 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m. It seems to be when a lot of the birds were coming through. And this radar station is actually down in the Santa Anas in Orange County, so it could be picking up birds that were flying through, and then by dawn-ish, they're around Bear Divide. So again, just getting some of the stuff we've been doing here with ground truthing those radar observations. When we were, one of the things we saw, like I said, is that each species kind of has its own timing in migration. And one guess about that that's out there is that birds that breed farther north probably tend to migrate a little later in the year. And you can imagine, if something's migrating in mid-March that breeds all the way up in Alaska, it's still completely frozen over for another month or two. And there's evidence within populations, like within Wilson's warblers, that birds that breed farther north migrate later, birds that breed farther south migrate earlier. And when we looked between species, we found a similar signal in our data, where when we compared the passage date to the mean breeding latitude, there's a positive relationship. So generally bird species that bred farther north tended to migrate a little bit later at Bear Divide. And another interesting thing here is that width predicts that pretty well too. So some of these species, going back to here, for example, yellow warbler that has a really wide width, they breed over a really long latitudinal gradient. So they breed from Southern California all the way up to northern Alaska. Where some of the more narrow ones, like Townsend's warblers, have a much narrower breeding distribution, latitudinal breeding distribution. They breed from southern Oregon, they breed from southern Oregon up through about the Washington, British Columbia border. And hermit warblers, similarly, they breed from Northern California down through kind of Southern California. So timing by species tends to be determined by what latitude they breed at, but then the width of passage tends to be determined by the latitudinal width of breeding. So probably the southern breeders are coming through earlier, and then as we go, we get the northern. Does that make sense? That was a bit of a convoluted explanation, but and like with yellow-rumped warblers, we get the Audubon's warblers, which are the southern breeders, earlier. We tend to get myrtle warblers, which breed farther north, later on, towards the end of the season. We've also had some cool unexpected birds. We had a summer tanager there. We get blue grosbeaks pretty regularly. Last year there was 2 years ago there was a rose-breasted grosbeak. So some cool stuff, uncommon local riparian breeders, some weirdos, which has been really fun. Another interesting thing is the finches seem to really change their year to year. So 2 years ago, we had a huge finch movement, especially Cassin's finches. In the few years that we had before that, before the 2021, we had no Cassin's finch records. And then in 2021, there were a couple weeks when we had them every single day, like multiples every single day, which is pretty cool. And that same year, we had tons of purple finches, tons of siskins. Last year was a lot quieter for finches. We had all three of these species, but way fewer. We only had a couple of Cassins, not nearly as many purples, not nearly as many siskins, but we had a whole lot of American goldfinches, which we had only had one or two flocks of the year before. So, it's pretty well known that finches are very eruptive and year to year, and we we see the same kinds of patterns at Bear Divide. Another cool thing is violet green swallows. We see huge movements of violet green swallows in late March through early April, so it might be a cool, fairly important corridor for these species that breed across the western mountains in the U.S. Another interesting thing that, this is fairly well known, but we're seeing it in our data is sex-based migration. So in general, adult males tend to move first, then adult females, and then young birds. And we see this in our data. And it's really stark, birds that are easy to sex, like these Western Tanagers, we'll see the males often for like 2 or 3 weeks before we even see a single female. And then by the time the females are coming through, the adult males are pretty done. So there is some overlap, but not much. It's often really stark in these birds that are really easy to sex, like Western Tanagers. And we haven't analyzed those data because we don't sex birds as they're flying by. It's just I try to take lots of pictures of a lot of birds and then we go back, and so we're still working on ways to sort of objectively analyze. But it's anecdotally, it's certainly something we see. And we also have some cool like goodies. Every once in a while, we'll get some weird water birds. So just about every year we've been up there, we've had 1 or 2 flocks of Western sandpipers go by, and they'll come by, same thing, they'll come by like knee height. And we're like, what the hell is that? Because they fly way faster than the passerines, and just like, poof, they go right by. Like, oh, those were sandpipers. That's so weird. Then we'll get loons, common loons, cormorants, ospreys, stuff like that. So that's kind of fun and weird and unexpected. Thrushes, one funny thing about thrushes is if you do, I was talking earlier about night flight calls. If you are interested in night flight calls in California, you're probably really familiar with Swainson's thrushes, because especially in the fall, but in general, that is by far the most common night flight call you hear when you're out listening at night. Just lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of Swainson thrushes. And what's interesting is we don't get as many at Bear Divide as I would have expected. I would have expected it to be the most common migrant just by, based on what you see on migration. And even hermit thrushes, there are fewer, and I think that is probably because thrushes are more nocturnally based as a migrant. They have bigger eyes. They tend to be in low-lit areas. I think they probably migrate more at night, but we still don't really know. But it's kind of cool. We do get hermit and Swainson's thrushes, but not nearly as many as I would have expected. And of course, we get hermits earlier, and then around mid-April, it switches off and it's Swainson's. And again, not very much overlap between those two, timing-wise. Another cool thing is we get lots and lots of Nashville warblers. I was talking about that earlier. In LA, we'll get in the spring, you'll go out birding and see 1 or 2 Nashville warblers. Where I'm from in Santa Cruz, Nashville warblers at treat. And man, the first time I was up there and saw, 150 Nashville warblers in the morning or something, I was like, holy crap. It's cool. So it must be, honestly, given how sort of sparse Nashville warblers are in the West and how many we get at Bear Divide, it's got to be a really important spot for them. For the whole population of Western Nashville warblers. That's pretty cool. And we also get lots and lots and lots and lots of Wilson's warblers. That's our most abundant migrant by far. We also get some raptors, but again, it's also a little surprising how few raptors we get. I thought it would be a pretty good pathway for raptors. They're just kind of few and far between, but we get pushes of Swainson's hawks. Swainson's hawks seem to be the only raptor that really uses Bear Divide as a regular migratory corridor. Some of the other stuff we get, red tails and sharpies and coops, it's just like one cruising around or cruising by, whereas Swainson's hawks, we will actually get flocks moving north through the divide, which is pretty cool. Again, pretty early, even late February into mid-March. And we've also had some cool like hybrids and intergrades, stuff like that. So like this Audubon's and Myrtle intergrade. It's got the yellow throat like a myrtle, like an Audubon's, and the white supercilium like a myrtle, and then the little white hook on the side of the throat like a myrtle. Got black splotches in the chest like an Audubon's, but then streaks like a myrtle. It's pretty cool. Here's a completely different one. We've also had some cool Hermit Townsend's warbler hybrids. So this one's got like the yellow face like a hermit, but then yellow below the bib and streaks like a Townsend's. And here's a different one. So this is a hermit head on a Townsend's body, and then here's a Townsend's head on a hermit body, which is pretty cool. So that kind of stuff's been fun. Also, black-chinned sparrows breed there. Another bird that's hard to see on migration that we've had a few come through. Again, some of the local movements are way bigger than expected, or birds that we thought were local movements that may not be, like band-tailed pigeons. We also get quite a few acorn woodpeckers moving through, and still not sure exactly what the deal is with that. Surprising numbers of phainopeplas, probably double breeders going in the desert, maybe some local breeders. Some days, in like May, early to mid-May, they can be kind of the most common bird up there, which is pretty cool. Also, one of the things we found is time of day. Different species tend to migrate a little differently time of day. The Swainson socks, we think of raptors as diurnal. The biggest pushes of Swainson socks I've had up there have consistently been before sunrise, have been really early, which is weird. And then other stuff like flycatchers, especially large flycatchers like ash-throat flycatchers and kingbirds and stuff, tend to migrate later. They tend to migrate late in the morning, midday, which is pretty cool. Hummingbirds tend to come through really early. So we're still not sure what exactly affects what time of the morning. So what do we know? A very little bit. What do we still have to learn? A whole lot, but it's a really, really cool place, really unique. I highly recommend everybody go visit. It's an awesome place. I don't know how much I'll be able to be there this year. I'll still be running the project. I'll still be running the count, but I'll be basically hiring and paying counters and probably go down and visit a little bit. But I gotta teach next semester up here in Modesto. But it's a wonderful place, and we're looking forward to continuing to count and do research up there and see what we can learn. And if you're interested in getting involved or keeping up with what's going on, check out beardivide.org. We're always open to donations for gear or for paying counters. You can buy T-shirts there too, but you can also keep up with live data and see what we're doing. And with that, I'll just put up my acknowledgments and not read them, but I will thank you all for watching and joining me tonight. And I'm sorry that I put this off twice, but glad that I'm doing it now. Thanks, everybody.
Any questions? You take questions?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, exactly where is Bear Divide and how do you get there?
We've got, if you go to beardivide.org, there's a little Google map with a pin dropped right there. But if you search again on Google Maps or Apple Maps for Bear Divide Picnic Area, that'll take you just about right to it.
Okay, so it's on the road. About yellow-billed cuckoos. You get any yellow-billed cuckoos flying through there ever?
Never have, but as far as I know, there's only, I think, either four or five county, records, modern records for all of Los Angeles County for yellow-billed cuckoos. So that's a bird that I hope to get there someday, but is exceedingly rare on the coastal slope of California. Yeah, never have, not yet.
Where's the paper that you published on this? So pictures in the paper, where should people go to find that?
Western Birds. It's the Journal of the Western Field Ornithologist, and you can find that online, or you can order the journal Western Birds. And
that's not, I don't think that's paywalled, is it?
I don't think so, no. I think it's
yeah.
Available. Okay. If it is paywalled or you can't download it, you can also go to my personal website, ryansterrill.com, and I've posted a PDF there. I post PDFs of pretty much all my papers there.
So does the lack of raptors help explain the large number of smaller birds using Bear Divide?
It could. I think, a lot of the raptors we have probably aren't doing much hunting of migratory birds. There are raptors that do that, famously, falcons in the Mediterranean, and, peregrines and maybe Cooper's hawks and stuff. But, a lot of the, Swainson's hawks aren't really going to catch birds on the wing, hills, and, even coops and sharpies when they're migrating, and those probably aren't. So maybe it could be, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Some very complimentary things I'll share with you as we go on, but who owns Bear Divide and what year was it first discovered?
So Bear Divide is adjacent to the Angeles National Forest. It is, I'm pretty sure it's managed by the Bureau of Land Management. It's public property. It is, so we have permits from the National Forest, or the San Gabriel National Forest. But where we stand is actually just outside of it. But there's also a fire station right below there. And so I'm not sure if it's owned by the state or BLM or National Forest, but it is public land, and it's just outside San Gabriel National. What was the second question?
What year was it discovered? And relative to that, have you talked to any of the indigenous communities to see if there's any stories about the bird concentrations or indigenous place names associated with migrants?
That's a great question. I have been considering that. I've thought about it, and I just haven't found who to reach out to. But that's something that I'm really interested in pursuing.
Yeah, I have somebody we can talk to.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Um, has there, oh, from Alexander DeBarros, who also had some comments about the banding station. And if you want to unmute and ask if you had some things to share there, but he also had a question, which is, has there been any study of nocturnal flight calls at Bear Divide?
A little bit. Corey Husick has camped up there a few times and put out flight recorders, and surprisingly, he has had not a lot. It seems like most of what's going on up there is during the day. But again, last year we put out a nocturnal flight call recorder all season. We haven't looked at those data yet because it's a lot of data, but once we are able to analyze those data, we'll have a better idea.
Glenn Matheson, maybe you want to elaborate a little bit. The question he has is night versus day migration.
Seems to be mostly diurnal as far as we can tell. But we still don't know.
Do bats migrate through?
Maybe. Don't
know. Excellent presentation. Awesome. Was there a few years ago. Wonderful. Whole new outlook on Western songbird migration. So I think we're very much appreciating what you shared here. Yeah. Any other questions? So you can be reached at through your website, ryansterrill.com. Or
yeah, all my contact info's on there.
Yep. And I will note that our talk next month is actually going to be about nocturnal flight call monitoring in Los Angeles Basin. So Andy
Excellent.
Birch has been working a little bit on flight call monitoring. So next month, so 1 month, second Wednesday in October, y'all can tune in for that. Then in December, Marianne has a great question. Will LAAS do a field trip to Bear Divide in the spring? So who do you recommend we talk to who would like to guide a trip to Bear Divide in the spring?
I could give you some recommendations, just to folks that go up there regularly. Maybe if you just send me an email, I can reach out to people and then send you a list of names or something.
Right. So you saw that happening in real time. Yes, we were interested in doing that. And that's me asking Ryan for some help.
I mean, I would offer to, but I'm up here.
Bit of a commute. Yeah, that's great. So, and then continuing on, our December presentation is going to be about tree care for birds, which has a lot to do with our residents, but also potentially birds that are, stocking up and feeding and wintering here in the basin as advice. So those are our next couple of months. We welcome everybody who wants to get notice of these. I saw through the poll that most people got our newsletter, our email. If you'd like to be on our email list, just go to the LA Audubon website. At the bottom of every page, you can put your email address in and hit the subscribe button, and you'll get on there and get our newsletter and these updates, bird walks, etc. And also, if you want to join, the button's in the upper left of the website, and I put the Bear Divide in the chat as well as it being on the slide, and you can head over there and support the work that's being done. I think you take volunteers as well as financial support, right?
Yep. Yeah, and anybody, we take volunteers at any level too. So if you want to come up and just stand around and look at birds or say, hey, what could I do to help or whatever, whatever level of involvement is totally fine. It helps. You can imagine as you're looking at the pad and trying to put stuff, it often helps just to have somebody there, pointing stuff out or calling stuff out. So absolutely. That's
really great. So on behalf, I'll take the prerogative to say that it is on behalf of everybody here. Thank you so much. This was really a great presentation, exciting for the region. and we appreciate the work that you've done in bringing this to us, and all the science that you've been doing on it, and that you're now out educating our next generations of ornithologists here in the state. I think that's great. So with that, I'm going to just end the Facebook feed here.